self-publishing or indie publishing is really what it sounds like. It is you as the author publishing your own work. You're wearing a whole bunch of hats. You're taking on different roles. That means you're going to be the writer. You're going to be the editor to a degree. You're going to take care of your own revisions. You're going to take care of book design and potentially book cover. What's production is the word I'm looking for. You're in charge of marketing. You're in charge of finding a distributor. You are in charge of everything, or you have to hire outside sources to wear those hats for you.
Yes.
That's where it comes from. Indie publishing is my preferred term. It's funny because if we had spoken 3 years ago, I would never say self-publishing because of an old stigma attached to it.
Yes.
But I think while indie publishing is gaining popularity, people still know the term, and so it's kind of re-entered my vernacular.
Yeah.
But that stigma comes from before what we generally call the Kindle revolution, which, correct me if I'm wrong, Hank, around 2008, 2010 was
Yes.
when that kicked
Yes.
off.
Yes, around 2008, but really kind of the groundswell of attention about 2010.
Yeah.
So yeah,
And so
going
when
on
we
about
say the
15
Kindle
years now.
revolution, yeah. So when we say the Kindle revolution, we're talking about Amazon making e-readers more accessible, but also giving a platform to self-published authors to distribute via their site.
Yep. And
And that's the big
that
one.
was the missing piece is we had e e-readers, sort of for a while, but there was no, kind of plug and play publishing platform. It was the combination of those 2 things is what changed the world, really.
Yeah, especially with ebooks, because you had authors with their novels, but if you wanted people to read them, you needed to physically get those books to this
Right.
person. And so the distribution and the printing, other order, the printing and the distribution of those books could only occur if you had a print house or a publisher that had a print house. And so with the Kindle revolution, that's what really kicked off indie publishing or self-publishing. Prior to that, if you were to self-publish, generally you were going to what most people refer to as a vanity press, and you were paying all the fees to get a box of your books shipped to you, and that's basically it. You had no distribution. You had no way of getting it out there unless you popped it in the trunk of your car and sold it in a coffee shop parking lot or something, got chased
Yep.
away by the owner. And it was generally seen as a negative thing because back then there was no marketing, there was no like entrepreneurial side of indie publishing. And so really you're just like, I don't want to do the work to get my book to a publisher. I don't want to deal with gatekeepers. I might not have a good enough book for traditional publishing at that time. So I'm just going to print it and say I'm an author because I have a box of books.
Yeah.
That all changed though.
And I know people that have cases of books in their garage, where they went through that whole process and, have the scars to to prove it. Yeah, it's pretty bad. I mean, and another thing, and we traditionally think about novelist, when we talk about that, but sometimes, you would have people that published, self-help books, nonfiction of some sort, and they just didn't either understand the process or didn't, know how to go about that, and they would use that route and get books published, and maybe they were, someone who would speak at conventions or something, and then they would take a box of books. So even though it's very unseemly, on the surface, for some people in certain circumstances, it was something that worked for them.
Mhm.
Almost never in the world of fiction, though.
Yeah. And so you might be thinking, okay, what's the difference between me ordering a bunch of books from a vanity publisher and me putting my book on Kindle Direct Publishing, KDP, or Smashwords, or Lulu, or Ingram Spark?
Right.
And the difference is that we now, because of this democratization that I referenced before, because you can do all of this yourself, now the market and readers are going to be judging the quality of your book.
Right.
Before, if I ordered a case of books and said, "Oh, I'm a hotshot author," no one can dispute that unless your family says, "No, you're not. You just ordered a bunch of books." Now, if I publish a book and it gets 100 1 and 2 star reviews, that's the market and readers telling me, "Okay, you need to improve your craft." That's our new gatekeepers.
Right.
And that's how indie publishing kind of regulates itself to a degree. So before I dive into what I consider all the pros of indie publishing, is there anything you want to add to our little
No,
introduction spiel?
no, I feel like that if we keep commenting on the introduction,
Yeah.
we're never gonna move past the introduction. So keep this train moving
Keep
forward
it
because
going.
yeah, I think we both have a lot to say about this. So if
Yeah.
we're gonna hit all of them, let's get going.
All right. So, the pros of indie publishing or self-publishing, there are a bunch of them, and for me personally, there are pros like you get to operate on your own schedule. You can be more flexible. Whereas someone might provide you with a deadline if you have a traditional publisher. You are more, if you're a hobbyist or an amateur writer, you don't necessarily need to stress so much about that, which can work in your detriment, and it can mean your book can be pushed off forever and ever. But that flexibility is something that a lot of people enjoy in indie publishing. One of the other great things is that there are no quote unquote arbitrary gatekeepers. And I think about the chat that you had with Stephen Arian 2 weeks ago now. And he
I think so,
said,
yeah.
yeah, he said the agent that he secured with his book, he was one of 10 that got accepted that year out of 7,000 submissions. And if you hear that and you think that there were 6,990 bad submissions, then you're just being kind of disingenuous, right?
Right,
In that there were undoubtedly some amazing authors that just weren't lucky enough to get picked up, right? They
right.
didn't have a good enough query letter. They didn't have a strong enough opening, but maybe the remaining 95% of their book was some of the best stuff ever written. We'll never know because there's the gatekeeper in place to stop them from traditionally publishing.
Right, right.
Right.
And I feel like, gatekeeper has a decidedly negative connotation, and I guess it should, but that doesn't necessarily mean that some guy is standing over here and has a personal vendetta against you. Like you
Mhm.
said, the luck of the draw is a huge, part of it, and like you alluded to, maybe it wasn't a strong opening, maybe he didn't have a query letter that grabbed their attention before they ever got to the manuscript. There's so many pieces that could go wrong, and yeah, but
Yeah,
just because there's a gatekeeper doesn't necessarily mean that they're actively against you. It just
correct.
means that they're trying to sift through all of the submissions as well.
Correct. And we can chat more about this in the cons of self-publishing or the pros of traditional publishing, but gatekeepers do help weed out poor writing, right?
Yes.
Of those 7,000 books, I'm sure many of them were not up to publication standards. And so they were kind of picked out accordingly. But there were confidently so many in there that would have been excellent reads for a good amount
Yeah.
of people. And maybe it's just the market wasn't ready for it, or maybe that particular agent isn't interested in these kinds of books, which do your research when you're going to query an agent, but still, that is something rather arbitrary, cutting this author off from being published. And when you self publish, you don't have to worry about that. Um,
Right.
Something else that excites me about self publishing, and really the biggest draw as to why I pursued that path, is because it's so entrepreneurial in how you approach it. You are not just an author, you get to do all these different things, and if you're willing to put in the work, like your destiny is within your control. You get to choose how you market, you get to choose what the book cover looks like, you get to choose when you go live with your email list subscribers, you get to choose what genre you write next, right? But it comes at a cost, and often a monetary cost, if not a time cost as well. But you have that creative control, which is excellent.
Yeah.
And then last or second last point that I have, normally I don't make a list for these fireside chats, Hank, but I want to make sure I get everything out there for the fine folks watching. Um, you you make more money in terms of percentage of the sales when you self-publish.
Yes.
The
Decidedly more.
yeah, decidedly more. The royalties for self-publishing or indie publishing through KDP, for example, you'll get 70%, up to 70% on ebooks. It's up to, I believe, 40% minus printing costs for paperback. if my numbers are current, as opposed to 5 to 10% with a traditional publisher. Now, the
Yeah.
balance is that it's on you then to boost those sales so that you can take advantage of those higher margins, because a traditional publisher will outmarket you, but you get
Help
more.
market you.
Yes, help. Yes,
Help.
help
Let's
outmarket. Yeah,
yeah. And
yeah,
I'm jumping ahead, but
yeah. It's tough not to, though, because they're kind of
yeah,
tied together.
they are.
Self-publishing rose because of the flaws in traditional publishing, but that doesn't
Yes.
mean traditional publishing is bad. And
Right.
so the last thing on my list is that you can act more quickly as an indie author than you can as a traditionally published one. When you submit, if I were to submit my finished book to a traditional publisher tomorrow, we might see it in 2 to 3 years if they're a larger one. Smaller ones have a little more flexibility. I could feasibly take my first draft from tomorrow, and like some authors, 2 months, it's out in the market and is generating money for them.
Right.
Right. And the same goes if there's a current trend in markets. Like right now, romantasy is really hot. It will probably always be really hot. But let's say there's a specific subgenre. Let's say, fairy romantasy is very popular right now. By the time you write and submit your book to a traditional publisher, that trend might be gone. Hockey romance right now, super hot. In 2 years, nobody might be reading it. But as an indie author, you can write your hockey romance, you can get it out within the year and capitalize on that trend if that's something that you want to do.
Yeah. Or if you write a hockey romance, find that the market no longer supports that, you can change those hockey sticks to wizards
Mm-hmm.
staffs. And,
You have
yeah,
that flexibility. That
you
that's
have that flexibility.
that's the
Yeah.
name of the game, I think,
Right.
with indie authors, is flexibility and freedom if you're willing to put in the work.
Right.
Now, Hank,
Right.
I'm going to cede to you for the cons.
Well, the cons, and I do not have a detailed list of points here, so I'm going to be r- rambling off the top of my head like a crazy person. But the first thing that I think of as a con for indie publishing is, and I think it is a stereotype that's not always a truthful one, that writers are introverts and don't like to, they just want to write words. They don't want to do any of the other stuff. And a lot of times stereotypes are, become stereotypes for a reason. Not always. Sometimes they're unfair, and that's not the discussion I'm trying to have. But sometimes you get tagged with things for a reason, and sometimes people would rather just write the words and have someone else do all the marketing work, the forward facing work, where, here's my book, would you like to buy it? That scares the dickens out of a lot of people. um I'm not a great salesman, and I don't like the icky part of sales sometimes. And sometimes you have to, swallow your pride and, you know and sell your wares. um so that's one thing, is that some people are not comfortable wearing all the hats. The other side of that is there are a lot of hats.
Yeah.
You are the writer. You are kind of a project manager, because you have to think about when you're writing this book. And great conversation we had the other day with Randy Ingermanson. He talked about one of the things that brought about his snowflake method of outlining was thinking about his target audience. Thinking about who he was going to sell this book to before he started writing it, and that helped to shape it. So you've got to have that hat on as well. Who's going to be my target audience? Who's going to buy this? Yes, Celeste. There's so much work involved. Yes. Um, um, I'm sorry, I've got sidetracked reading
That's okay.
Celeste's comments. And so it's a lot of work. And you phrased it a minute ago, Doug, that you get to do all these different jobs. And yes, when you a lot of times people realize that when they get into the other aspects of the business of writing and publishing, that they actually enjoy it, and that talking about books and talking about your book in particular, it can be very enjoyable, and people dread something until they actually do it, and then they find out they like it. But you've got to be uncomfortable for a little bit. So that's one thing. And then you also touched on the cost. You are ultimately responsible for all of the aspects of the publishing process, and that's your writing. Do you have a computer? Are you going to write on this? So you've got to buy a computer, which everybody has to do that. You've got to figure out what software you're going to use. You've got to get that first draft done. Then you've got to edit it, and you've got to figure out if you're going to utilize beta readers, and you figure out that whole process, and then you've got to bring an editor in and deal with the editor feedback, and then you've got to get a cover designed. And are you going to do it yourself? Can you use Photoshop? Can you use Canva? There are people that do this for a living. Maybe shop around the internet. Lots of good places that you can find deals on covers, but you've got to be a bit of a sleuth to dig around, find the best deals, find someone that you can work with. It's all about relationship building. You're in control of all of this. And to jump ahead, which we, in traditional publishing, um, you are still responsible for a lot of that marketing, but you have help. You have a team there that's kind of guiding you, and you're still going to have to get out there, and you're still going to have to sell your book, but there are people to help you, and there's an editorial staff there to help you. And it's a team effort as opposed to a Doug effort, if you're indie publishing a book. So I would say that the big cons of indie publishing are just to understand what you're getting into. That yes, you have all the freedom, you have all the power, but you also have all the responsibility. And so that's
if I could build on those 2 points, actually. The first being, if you're choosing to indie publish and you're saying, I'm going to do these things by myself, you're then taking on the responsibility to say, I'm going to do them up to a certain standard and like the best that I can possibly be, because you're foregoing a professional doing them.
Right.
And I've seen it hurts. It breaks my heart to say this, but I've seen so many indie published books where like people have made their own covers and they don't understand color theory, they don't understand graphic design or the tools that they use. And so it could be an amazing book, but because everybody judges a book by its cover, that book will not sell. Yes. So like there's the technical ceiling that you either need to educate yourself to or pull someone in to help you with, that if you're going to indie publish, like that's a requirement. You need to be a professional because you are embarking on a professional endeavor after you're done writing this book. The other thing is cost, and it will sneak up on you if you let it. One of the things that I want to do for our premium dabblers in the future is a workshop breaking down the cost of self-publishing, or maybe writing in general, because when you start factoring in all of these different things to just get out a book, it can be thousands of dollars. As an editor myself, like I am charging over $1,000 for a copy edit. For line editing, you're probably looking north of maybe $3,000. Developmental editing, some books are long enough that you're looking at 5 figures for a very in-depth developmental editor. If it's your first book, you will never recoup that cost. Right? You need so many books, like double-digit books, to make a decent chunk of money as an indie publisher, that it's not worth it to invest $2,000 in a book cover. Right. But it's also not worth it to just say, hey, I'm going to make it on a Saturday morning and go with that. You need to find that sweet spot.